Today, Class 6 Climate Change, International Conventions, and Global Initiatives. Climate change, a change in global or regional climate patterns, particularly a change apparent from the mid to the late 20th century onwards and attributed largely to the increased levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide produced by the use of fossil fuels. Climate change means a change of climate which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere and which is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time period 100 years. Climate change is usually measured in major shifts in temperature, rainfall, snow, and wind patterns lasting decades or more. Humans are creating climate change by burning large amount of fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, deforestation, which when forests are cut down or burned, they can no longer store carbon and the carbon is released to the atmosphere. International environmental legislations. Climate change. It is a periodic modifications of Earth's climate brought about due to the changes in the atmosphere as well as the interactions between the atmosphere and various other geological, chemical, biological and geographical factors within the Earth's system. Climate change can make weather patterns less predictable. These unforeseen weather patterns can make it difficult to maintain and grow crops, making agriculture dependent countries like India vulnerable. Efforts taken at the international level to combat climate change. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change IPCC, the World Meteorological Organization WMO, and the UN Environment Programme UNEP founded the IPCC to provide for a mechanism to study the effects of global warming at a governmental level. IPCC is a UN body that assesses the science related to climate change. It provides the policymakers with regular scientific assessments on climate change, its implementations, implications, and potential future risks, while also providing adaptation, and mitigation options. It complements UNFCCC and vice versa. United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change UNFCCC. It came to force on 21st March 1994. The 195 countries that have ratified it are called the parties to the convention. The UNFC is a Rio Convention of one of the three adopted at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. The others include the UN Convention on Biological Diversity and the UN Convention to combat desertification. The Joint Liaison Group was established to ensure cooperation among the three conventions. Currently, it is also consists of a Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. Kyoto Protocol. This protocol holds the developed countries are accountable for the current high levels of GHG emissions into the atmosphere due to their role in the Industrial Revolution. Paris Agreement. Signed in 2016, it is the world's first comprehensive climate agreement. It aims to keep the global temperature well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial times and endeavor to limit them even more to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Strengthen the nation's ability to combat the adverse impacts of climate change. The Paris Accord calls for a reduction of GHGs emitted due to the human activities equal to that of the trees, soil, and oceans so that they can be absorbed naturally. Next, RED plus reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. RED plus is a mechanism developed by parties of the UNCCC It creates financial value for the carbon stored in forests to offer incentives for the developing nations to reduce emissions from forested lands and invest in low carbon paths. The developing nations will receive results based payments for results based actions. The Red Plus goes beyond simply deforestation and forest degradation by including the role of conservation, sustainable management of forests, and enhancement of forest carbon stocks. Montreal Protocol. The United Nations Evergreen Environmental Environment Program UNEP has been addressing this issue since 1977 under the auspices of UNEP. The nations of the world arrived at the Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer in Vienna 1985. Through this convention, nations committed themselves to protecting the ozone layer and to cooperate with each other in scientific research to improve understanding of the atmospheric processes and serious consequences of ozone depletion. The convention provides for future protocols and specified procedures for amendment and dispute settlements. Global Environment Facility. The Global Environment Facility (GEF) unites 183 countries in partnership with international institutions, civil society organizations, and the private sector to address global environmental issues while supporting national sustainable development initiatives. An independently operating financial organization, GEF, provides grants for projects related to biodiversity, climate change, international waters, land degradation, the ozone layer, and persistent organic pollutants. The GEF also serves as financial mechanism for the following conventions: the Convention on Biological Diversity (CBD), United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change (UNFCCC), UN Convention to Combat Desertification (UNCCD), Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants (POPS), Minamata Convention on Mercury. The GEF, although not linked formally to the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer, supports implementation of the protocol in countries with economics in transition. Climate change in India. Global temperature rise. The planet's average surface temperature has risen about 1.62 degrees Fahrenheit, 0.9 degrees Celsius, since the late 19th century, a change driven largely by the increased carbon dioxide and other human-made emissions into the atmosphere. Most of the warming occurred in the past 35 years, with the 5 warmest years on record taking place since 2010. Warming oceans. The oceans have absorbed most of this increased heat, with the top 700 meters of ocean showing warming of the more than 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit since 1969. Shrinking ice sheets. The Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets have decreased in mass. Data from NASA's Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment show Greenland lost an average of 286 billion tons of ice per year between 1993 and 2016, while Antarctica lost about 127 billion tons of ice per year during the same time period. The rate of Antarctica ice mass loss has tripled in last decade. Glacial retreat. Glaciers are retreating almost everywhere around the world, including in the Alps, Himalayas, Andes, Rockies, Alaska, and Africa. Decreased snow cover. Satellite observation reveals that the amount of spring snow cover in the northern hemisphere has decreased over the past 5 decades, and that the snow is melting earlier. Sea level rise. Global sea level rose about 8 inches in the last century. The rate in the last 2 decades, however, is nearly double that of the last century and is accelerating slightly every year. Declining Arctic sea ice. Both the extent and thickness of the Arctic sea ice has declined rapidly over the last several decades. Extreme events. The number of record high temperature events in the United States has been increasing, while the number of the record low temperature events has been decreasing since 1950. The US has also witnessed increasing number of intense rainfall events. Ocean acidification. Since the beginning of industrial revolution, the acidity of the surface ocean water has increased by about 30%. This increase in the result of human emitting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and hence more being absorbed into the oceans. The amount of carbon dioxide absorbed by the upper layer of the ocean is increasing by about 2 billion tons per year. Climate change risks in India. A new climate for peace. Taking actions on climate and fragility risks, an independent report commissioned by members of the G7 identifies 7 compound climate fragility risks that pose serious threats to the stability of the states and societies in the decade ahead. Local resource competition. As the pressure on the natural resources increases, competitions can lead to instability and even violent conflicts in the options of effective dispute resolution. Livelihood insecurity and migration. Climate changes will increase the human insecurity of people who depend on natural resources for their livelihoods, which could push them to migrate or turn to illegal sources of income. Extreme weather events and disasters. Extreme weather events and disasters will exacerbate fragility challenges and can increase people's vulnerability and grievances, especially in conflict affected situations. Violate food prices and provision. Climate change is highly likely to disrupt food production in many regions, increasing prices and market volatility, and heightening the risk of protest, rioting, and civil conflict. Transboundary water management. Transboundary waters are frequently a source of tension as demand grows and climate affects availability and quality. Competition over water use will likely increase the pressure on existing governance structures. Sea level rise and coastal degradation. Rising sea levels will threaten the viability of low-lying areas even before they are submerged, leading to social disruption, displacement, and migration, while disagreements over maritime boundaries and oceans resources may increase. Unintended effects of the climate policies. A climate adaptation and mitigation policies are more broadly implemented, the risk of unintended negative effects, particularly in fragile contexts, will also increase. Relevance of climate change in India. India is among the countries most vulnerable to climate change. It has one of the highest densities of economic activity in the world and very large number of poor people who rely on the natural resources base for their livelihood with a high dependence on rainfall. By 2020, pressure on India's water, air, soil and forest is expected to become the highest in the world. One of the most significant ways that climate change will impact the lives of people in India will be through its water resources. While water sustains life, it also too often wreaks havoc through devastating floods and droughts. A changing climate will only aggravate these shocks. Potential effects on climate change in India. Extreme heat. India is already experiencing a warming climate, unusual and unprecedented spells of hot weather are expected to occur far more frequently and cover much larger areas. Under 4 degrees centigrade warming, the west coast and southern India are projected to shift to new high temperature climatic regimes with significant impacts on agriculture. Changing rainfall patterns. Decline in monsoon rainfall since 1950 has already been observed. A 2 degrees centigrade rise in the world's average temperatures will make India's summer monsoon highly unpredictable. At 4 degrees centigrade warming, an extremely wet monsoon that currently has a chance of occurring only once in 100 years is projected to occur every 10 years by the end of the century. Dry years are expected to be drier and wet years wetter. Droughts. Evidence indicates that parts of the South Asia has become drier since 1970, with an increase in the number of droughts. Droughts have major consequences. In 1987 and 2002 to 2003, droughts erected more than half of the India's crop area and led to a huge fall in crop production. Droughts are expected to be more frequent in some areas, especially in the northwestern India, Jharkhand, Orissa, and Chhattisgarh. Crop yields are expected to fall significantly because of extreme heat by 2040s. Groundwater. Even without the climate change, 50% of India's groundwater reserves are overexploited. Falling water tables can be expected to reduce further on account of increasing demand for water from a growing population, more affluent lifestyles, as well as from the services sectors and industry. Glacial melt. Most Himalayan glaciers have been retreated over the past century. At 2.5 degrees centigrade warming, melting glaciers and the loss of snow cover over the Himalayas are expected to threaten the stability and reliability of northern India's primarily glacier-fed rivers. Alterations in the flow of the Indus, Ganges, and Brahmaputra rivers could significantly impact irrigation, affecting the amount of food that can be produced in their basins as well as the livelihood of millions of people. Sea level rise. With India close to the equator, the subcontinent would see much higher rises in the sea levels than higher latitudes. Sea level rise and the storm surges, which high to salt water intrusions in the coastal areas, impacting agriculture, degrading groundwater salinity, salinity contaminating drinking water, and possibly causing a rise in diarrhea cases and cholera outbreaks as the cholera bacteria survives longer in saline water. Kolkata and Mumbai, both densely populated cities, are particularly vulnerable to the impact of sea level rise, tropical cyclones, and riverine flooding. Apart from this, food and energy security are also major concerns. Water scarcity, health hazards among the masses, and migration and political conflicts are expected to grow. India's response to climate change. National Action Plan on Climate Change (NAPCC) outlines existing and future policies and programs addressing climate mitigation and adaptation. The action plan identifies 8 crore national missions running through to 2017. Solar energy, enhanced energy efficiency, sustainable habitat, water sustaining the Himalayan ecosystem, Green India, sustainable agriculture, and strategic knowledge for climate change. Most of these missions have strongly adaptation imperatives. National Clean Energy Fund. The Government of India created the National Clean Energy Fund (NEEF) in 2010 for the purpose of financing and promoting clean energy initiatives and funding research in the area of clean energy in the country. The purpose of the fund is built by levying a cess of Indian rupees 50, subsequently increased to INR 100 in 2014 per ton of coal produced domestically or imported. Paris Agreement. Under the Paris Agreement, India have made 3 commitments. India's greenhouse gas emission intensity of its GDP will be reduced by 33 to 35% below 2005 levels by 2030. Alongside, 40% of India's power capacity would be based on non-fossil fuel sources. At the same time, India will create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent through additional forest and tree cover by 2030. International Solar Alliance ISA was launched at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris on 30 November 2015 by India and France in the presence of Mr. Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the United Nations. Bharat stage emission norms. Emissions from vehicles are one of the top contributors to air pollution, which led the government at the time to introduce Bharat Stage 2000 vehicle emission norms from April 2000, followed by BS2 in 2005. BS3 was implemented nationwide in 2010. However, in 2016, the government decided to meet the global best practices and leapfrog to BS6 norms by skipping BS5 altogether. National Institute on Climate Resilient Agriculture NICRA was launched during February 2011 by Indian Council of Agriculture Research ICAR with the funding from the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India. Objectives. Objective of this initiative is to enhance the resilience of Indian agriculture, covering crops, livestock and fisheries to climatic variability and climatic change through development and application of improved production and risk management technologies. Under this initiative, these site-specific technology packages are demonstrated on the farmers' fields so that they can be educated for adapting to current climate risks. Another objective is to enhance the capacity of scientists and other stakeholders in climate resilient agriculture research and its application. There are 4 components of this scheme as follows: strategic research on adaptation and mitigation, technology demonstration to cope with current climate variability in 100 vulnerable districts, capacity building, sponsored competitive research to fill critical gaps. The 21 institutes of the Indian Council of Agriculture Research are there for the strategic research. Unique features: critical assessment of the different crops or zones in the country for vulnerability to climate stresses and extreme events, in particular intra-seasonal variability of rainfall. Installation of the state of the art equipment like flux towers for the measurement of greenhouse gases in the large field areas to understand the impact of management practices and contribute data on emissions. Rapid and large scale screenings of crop germplasm, including wild relatives for drought and heat tolerance, through phenomics platforms for quick identification of promising lines and early development and release of heat drought tolerant varieties. Comprehensive field evaluation of new and emerging approaches of paddy cultivation like aerobic rice and SRA for their contribution to reduce the GHG emissions and enhance water saving. Special attention to livestock and fishery sectors, including aquaculture, which has not received enough attention in climate change research in the past. In particular, the documentation of adaptive traits in indigenous breeds will be the most useful step. Thorough understanding of crop pest or pathogen relationship and emergence of the new biotypes due to climate change. Simultaneous upscaling of the outputs both through KVKs and the National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture for wider adoption by the farmers. Thank you.